Oh, yes. Yeah. So the biggest, I would say there were a couple of shifts, and they didn't happen at equal period of
Intervals?
time. Right. And some of them were more or less self-conscious. So the biggest shift, which was, it would have moments of being clear and moments of being less clear, was going from focusing on a more narrow sense of, is someone lying, to getting the truth. So lying seems like it's intentional and conscious and factual, and getting the truth isn't necessarily factual. It could be emotional, it could be values, it could be motivational. And it also gets around this idea that it has to be intentional. And the reason for that is that it's not really a book about morality at all. It's about how to be happier and more successful and make the world a happier and more just place by getting the truth. And so by focusing, and the more I spoke about it over the years, and again, it wasn't going at the same pace all the time, but people would often get stuck around, oh, but is that really a lie? And so I decided, instead of saying, which I did for, oh my goodness, maybe 8 or 9 years or 10 years in various articles and talks and stuff, I would say, well, the way I define a lie is this. And then I realized, oh my God, I'm just like pushing against what everybody thinks. But if I instead say it's the truth, that's different. And then the second shift was harvesting. So the idea, oh, hey, how are you? Well, I saw you last night. Now I get to see you today. It's Dwayne. Hello. We're talking about this book idea that I have on harvesting the truth. Okay. And how it changed over the years. So the harvesting idea is the idea that it's not just a moment. So a lot of the lie detection research, as you know, is about you interview someone.
This little
how do you get them to confess right away? Right. It's all there. And sometimes even without interacting with them at all, just guess whether they're truthful or not. But harvesting implies a whole different set of a metaphor, and it implies, along with the truth, this less adversarial concept, right? Because you don't harvest freedom from bugs. You harvest in order to get something that's positive. And so the harvesting idea shifts the positive, and then it also shifts this idea that it needs to be long-term. So instead of figuring out, here are these little tells that reveal that someone's lying, it's figuring out what is that person like over time, and then harvesting the truth in that particular way. So that's one part. And then the mindfulness, and then later the compassion and self-compassion all came within the last couple of years. The biggest surprise, mindfulness isn't that big of a surprise. Some people have talked about it a little bit. But the compassion and self-compassion, I think, is. The compassion is a variation on what some people would call empathy, or like strategic empathy. You act as if you care about people, and then you get them to tell you the truth. But I think of the compassion as being, you're actually genuinely concerned about the person. You're not faking it, because if you're faking it, it's kind of going to leak out anyway, and that lack of authenticity will create negative affect. So it's genuinely caring about the person, but also in this wider point of view, right? So it's not, I only care about this person, I care about myself as well. And then the self-compassion is a pretty funny story. So the self-compassion is that when I've taught often very smart people, because the ability, a lot of emotional skills don't correlate with intelligence. Right. So I'll do workshops for very smart people, and they'll get so angry that they don't do well, and they will attack the model and think that it's not really successful. And finally I realized, oh, wow, this is because, in a sense, they lack, first of all, they're competitive people. So
right, and they've never done poorly on anything in their
life. Right. So it's very hard to deal with it anyway. But
it's envy crushing.
Yeah. Yes, it's envy crushing. Right. And the self-compassion part, though, allows one to focus on a kind of growth perspective and understanding, oh, well, this is difficult, a commonality. This is difficult for everybody, learning a new skill, and everybody who's good at some things, even if they're good at lots of things. You know this guy, he won an Academy Award for the software behind Toy Story. He goes to Renaissance. what is his name? And he's actually referred by Bob Cook. So Bob Cook is a programmer, right? And then he wins an Academy Award for creating the software that makes not just Toy Story possible, but all of the Pixar stuff possible. Then he writes a poem and he performs it at Renaissance. And it's actually a pretty funny poem. And then I see him dancing with his son at New Year's Eve. He's actually a really good dancer. And I thought, well, he's the exception because he's actually good at everything. But most people, there's something that they're not so good at. So that's a way, or it's not so good at right away. Like I'm sweaty from having just done cycling. And I imagined that it would take me forever to figure out how to get my Peloton boots, whatever they are, cleats, into the machine. It was super hard. And then it turns out, oh no, it actually wasn't that hard. It took me 4 or 5 times to get it right. And then I got better shoes that fit my wide feet better. And now it's just effortless. So that's the self-compassion part. But it's fun. I mean, I think it's the challenge for me has been figuring out the overall structure, both of the project, like what is the architecture of the structure, and then kind of a project management thing. So I've never written anything this long before. The format of how I usually write is 15 book pages to 45 book pages that appear in an academic journal. So that's a different length. But it's also every sentence is different. The whole organizational style is different. The way of reasoning is different. And even though a lot of my stuff is very conversational for academic writing, it's not as conversational as something you'd read in Psychology Today or a lot of other things. It might be similar to The Atlantic, I'd say, in some sense, but I'm not sure if that's the tone, that's the way I'm going for it. So there's that architecture of each individual, let's say, sentence and unit, and then the overall structure. And then this other layer of the project management part. Because I'm used to, for years, I've been an academic since 1995. So every summer, pretty much I have an idea, and then I write for an hour and a half to 2 hours in the morning after meditating. Then I eat, and in the afternoon, in some lackadaisical way, I edit it and think of things that I could look up. And then after a couple of weeks, or a month, it's done. And then in some lackadaisical way, I do the same thing in the morning. So then I shift to I'll edit in the morning.
Doesn't sound too lackadaisical to me.
It's not the most lackadaisical. It's not the most lackadaisical.
No, I mean, there's a structure and an intention to it. So that this is not lackadaisical in the normal sense. I mean, you may feel periods of relaxation alternating with bouts of thinking and writing, but I wouldn't call that lackadaisical. So
right. Well, that's good. That's a very good way of framing it. Right. And I would say the trick. There's a third motivational thing that's very hard, which is not obvious looking at my resume. Everything I've ever published since 1995, with 2 exceptions, has been pre-accepted. So with a short deadline, meaning everything I've ever published. So I just finished a book chapter on a book on culture and dispute resolution. And it's on culture and negotiation and lie detection. And somebody writes to me, they tell me how long it should be, when it's due. And then I know that so long as the words actually appear on the page in a reasonably ordered way, like clockwork, it'll be accepted, right? So this is, there's that motivational factor that I think makes it harder.
Sure. And do you have an outline for your book?
Yes. So yes and no, right? So that story attributed, the quote attributed to many people, it's harder to write something short than something long, right?
Right.
So I have an outline document, which once upon a time was quite lean. It might have been 2 pages, and it might have had the chapters there. And then I keep adding things in along the way and at the front.
Right.
So now it's not as lean, but I have in mind the sections.
Yeah.
I'm not sure how equal the sections will be. So there'll be a section on what are clues related to getting the truth, such as facial clues, changes in baseline, content clues, a section on negotiation, a section on interacting with people. So you notice these clues, how do you interact with them based on that? That's a third section. And then a section on mindfulness. And then that I suspect, but I'm not positive, having looked at like other books that are like this, that at the end there will be a section that will be little tiny sections on scripts or vignettes of how to apply this to particular situations, like how to get the truth about whether a hotel is sold out or not, or how to get the truth about
send me that chapter.
Sorry?
Send me that chapter.
What, the last one?
Yeah, the one about how to tell if a hotel is selling.
Oh, I'll give you a clue that I learned in 1980 from this very funny book by Gerald Ford, speechwriter, called How to Be a Very Important Person. And it's never, ever failed me. The answer is knowing a magical phrase, which is, do you have any out of order rooms? Because I'm totally happy to take an out of order room. I love this hotel. I'd really love to stay here. So an out of order room means a room that doesn't meet that given hotel's service standards. And now what that deviation means at the Four Seasons is very different from what that deviation means at the Days Inn. So at the Days Inn, the toilet might not work. And at the Four Seasons, everything's fine, but one of the standard artworks has like a crack in the frame or something, or it's very tiny deviations. So that's the way. Every hotel has rooms available every night. I'm going to take that back slightly. Teeny tiny, itsy bitsy boutique hotels, like 30 to 40 rooms, they might or might not have an out of order room, but even they usually do.
Mm-hmm.
I will keep that in mind.
Yeah.
No, it's really interesting. It's like, but it's generally true within a lot of industries that you have to, it's like Simon says, you have to ask something in exactly the right way. And often, this sort of relates to the clues, there's often a clue that they're not telling you the complete truth, even though they're really not lying by any conventional sense. So for example, they'll shrug their shoulders slightly, like, do you think this will be going on sale sometime soon? And they'll say, oh, we never do sales. And they shrug slightly. Well, what that means is sale is the wrong word. Sale is the wrong word. So then is there ever a friends and family discount? Do you ever sell the remainders before they go off to some big wholesaler? So there are often clues that there's some way of asking for it in a different way. Like on an airline, each airline has their own world of what's negotiable and not negotiable if something goes wrong. So my friend flies for Delta for 30 years. Delta won't give you money, but Delta will give you shocking amounts of points. And different people on the flight can give you different numbers of points, but they won't tell you that. So if you ask your flight attendant and coach, they have a certain quota of how much they can just give you because there's a mistake. Somebody got a not suitable meal. Let me try to remember. They were vegan and they got the meal and they said, oh, this is a really great sauce. And the person who serves this, oh yes, it's a really great sauce. You'd never know it, but it's made with veal jus. And the person was hysterical. But they didn't know the right thing to ask for. They just kept arguing over, I'm so upset. They never did anything. And so the people just thought we won't give them anything at all.
Well, you're definitely the person I want to call before I travel.
Well, Janice, I should definitely interview Janice as well.
I'm not into spreadsheets for traveling. I'm more like the conversational approach to exchanging information and monitoring it all on spreadsheets. I've got enough of my life has to be put out there in very definite and particular form. Not sure I want other compartments of my life dealt with exactly that same way.
Yeah, no, I totally agree.
A little more lackadaisical, to borrow a term from
I once took this class on at University of Miami on neuro-linguistic programming.
Oh yeah.
Neuro-linguistic programming is like the Holy Roman Empire, like it's a label, and there are all these different components of it ranging, as you know, right? Some of it is completely ridiculous, like eye accessing clues.
Totally bogus.
Yeah, but then other little parts of it, like the mirroring and the rapport, that's actually not so bad, right? So this person who does Feldenkrais, which is this body awareness.
Yeah, I know what it is.
Thing, great person, very mellow, very lackadaisical, except for his classes, which are very methodical. He says that he likes to meander. You'd have a goal for the class. And his goal for the class was to meander more. I think what he meant by meander actually would have been better understood by other people as savoring and being spontaneous. But the teacher spent a full hour with the class trying to convince him that that wasn't a worthwhile goal, to meander more, that he meandered enough in his life. Yeah.
So I have a goal, and that's a question for you.
Okay, ready?
The question for you is, over the course of your thinking about the book, has your concept of the truth stayed the same?
That's an interesting question. I mean, the language that I've used has definitely changed. Has the concept changed? In the sense that the overall model has been similar, with the parts about compassion and mindfulness being grafted on more towards the end and some of the details changing. But things that I thought of as being separate, such as how do you put in what someone's motivations are, it doesn't really make sense that somebody is lying about their motivations, or lying about it could be lying about their values, but lying about their motivations. They're not really lying about it, because motivations are often not conscious. But when you change it from lies to truth, suddenly motivation is not something that comes in sort of a different part of the book or a different part of the model. It's just another example of getting at what the truth is. What is someone's true motivation?
So I take it that one of the goals of having your outline, however sprawling the outline has become, and a good outline will become sprawling. I mean, it's 8 years. You have a few thoughts in those 8 years, right? And you see things in a new way. But one thing that shouldn't change is that everything that you think as you go, what the purpose of your outline, and every time I've written a book, I've used the outline until almost the very last page of the book. It's a reminder of how every part relates to the whole. That's the value of a really good outline. And you have to cover that explicitly or explicitly, all the way through, so that people know, well, why am I reading about meditation in a book on harvesting the truth? So, but it sounds fascinating.
Oh, thank you. That's really, so that's interesting. There's, I wonder if this is kind of the metaphor, is that it's like planning. You need to know, if you're trying to travel by plane, you need to all right, I need to get my airline tickets to know where I'm stopping. But then at a certain point, when I'm in Barcelona, I definitely want to get some food, but I won't necessarily know which food it is. And then there might be parts of Barcelona that I go to that are a little bit unrelated to the food. I'm just having a late breakfast here, so it's pretty funny how much food is on my mind. But that's, that's really great. So, so the chapters I have relatively clear in my mind are, there's the set of chapters dealing with clues. Then in terms of how to interact in the next part, it's what do you all truly want? So understanding your own conscious and unconscious goals and motivations, including goals for assumptions about what the process should be like. So that includes, are you going to be honest or not, in what ways? Then there's what they all want. So not what they want, which people often say, but they all. So a key part to that is layering on that you have to figure out, well, who are the potential decision makers? Who are the people who might be able to say no? And that's both people, but also the parts of themselves that they might. Are you watching this TV series, Hollywood on Netflix?
No, I haven't.
Oh my God, it's one of, although I guess it does hit my demographic in certain ways, having lived in LA and a lot of the characters are gay, but but I think it's actually very good generally. What's interesting is the studio head initially says there's no way that I'm making this certain movie because it has an Asian woman in it. And there's no way I'm casting this person who's African-American because African-Americans don't get cast in these kinds of roles. And it seems like all he's really motivated by is being a corporate person driven by the numbers. But as things unfold, it turns out that's not really what he wants. There's somebody else who's his boss, I think played by Carl Reiner maybe, who wants that. And then there's other parts of his life that aren't clear from the beginning that shift that. So what you all want, what they all want, what the different clues are, which is a set of chapters, that's relatively clear to me. How you interact with people is somewhat clear to me. I think there are parts to fill in there, but I at least know that's the set of material I want to cover. And then similarly with the negotiation, I sort of have in mind what the ideas are there that are similar to what most people write about negotiation as a rework of some things, like what motivates people. But I call that the candy lesson, the candy and the tobacco lesson. So when I do workshops, I ask people to volunteer, but whether somebody's lying or not. And then as they volunteer, I give them their choice of candy. And the point of that is that different things motivate different people. And you have to figure out what that is. But then the tobacco lesson, let's see if I have a prop here. Do you have any Tabasco sauce? No. We usually have tons of Tabasco sauce because Jeffrey's walking behind me, doesn't like any candy at all. He only likes Tabasco. And you might think there are two Tabasco lessons. Some people only don't like sweets at all. They like something totally different.
Mm-hmm.
And two, you might think, oh, it's something general, like I like hot sauce. No, it's only Tabasco.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so there's that. So I think I have a certain sense of what the certain chapters are more clear than others. So they're
right.
They're
but do you
not
know how
spreadsheet.
each one of them relates to your central thesis or
Yes.
central idea? All you need is like a sentence, with that link, because when you get into the depths of writing, your mind, if you're doing it right, usually your mind is sort of doing a deep dive and you can get lost in your own thoughts or in everything that you know about a topic. And, people like us who know a lot about a lot of things, you don't necessarily want to bring everything to bear on one particular topic where you're writing it for a particular purpose. There are other things you may know about the topic. So that's why it's helpful to have that thread of a sentence that helps you relate each part to the whole. And this is my reminder. This is why I'm covering this. I think I'm going to take out these paragraphs because while they're about this topic, they relate to another aspect of it. I mean, I think we've all been in that kind of a situation.
Yeah, what's funny is most of the things that I write, they don't have a strict page limit. But when they do, it really is such an interesting experience because my tenure piece in Cornell Law Review was on whatever happened to anti-Semitism. And it was about what is discrimination against a particular group, like you could think of anti-Semitism, or as the people who wrote The Authoritarian Personality thought after World War II, is it really just a generalized prejudice against anybody who's different, or a generalized preference for people who are part of a narrow group? So simple idea, right? But it was 155 pages because I thought, well, they've accepted it. And then I just kept throwing everything into it. I mean, it was really interesting. Whereas this recent chapter I did, it was only 15 pages. And I had to really look at not just every paragraph, but every sentence and trying to, make the words a little bit tighter. Yeah, totally different experience.
Oh, yeah. So I just did, an issue ago, I did a piece on, I actually posted it on Renaissance Weekend, on doctors in crisis. This huge crisis that doctors are experiencing, which they were experiencing before the COVID crisis, but which it has exacerbated in many ways because it originated in their relationship to the institutions that they work for. I don't know how much people know, but the practice of medicine has really radically shifted in the last 15 years. It's no longer, forget solo practitioners. Doctors are employees of organizations, and they've got two masters. They're the people who pay them and the patients. And it's a very unusual situation given what they're taught in medical school. And they are really feeling the crunch in many ways, manifest in things like suicide rates, burnout, and other signs of distress. Anyway, I did this article and I just wrote. I wrote what it needed. I had an outline. My outline was, oh, thank God I had an outline. It saved me. It was just terrific to have. And my article came in at about 6,000 words. Well, we only have space. I mean, most I could get away with would be like 4,000 words, and that would be pushing it. So I really had to go through and take out what I could, and I couldn't. So I gave it to my editor-in-chief. They agreed they would run 5,000 words, which was really unusual. So she took out words. She wound up taking out the meat of this article. So I kind of made a separate deal with the art director and got the meat back, because you had to know what the crux of the problem was in order to understand why this is a crisis for doctors.
So is the deal with the art director? This is fantastic. Is the deal?
Everybody won on this one. I mean, even the editor, I didn't rub it in the editor-in-chief's face. It was just the art director came up with another column of space for me. And, but that was one where it really...
When did that come out?
It just came out, and I posted it on Renaissance Weekend, I think in both groups. So it's there. There's a link to it. It's a piece I really like. And when I wrote it, my feeling was, if you don't care, if you don't feel my partisanship, my passion, then I will have failed in writing this article, because it so changed my mind about doctors. That asshole driving the BMW. Yeah, well, I mean, he cares. He cares about you. And I literally address it almost quite like that. I know,
Really?
Yeah, I do. There's a section which I really address having sympathy for the devil and why. I mean, so doctors are these high status, high income people, but there's a lot about what they do. Your interaction with the doctor, but what you don't know is, the stacks of lab results waiting on his desk that you can't see, or the two people in crisis in the emergency room that you can't see, or the ones who are code blue in the ICU, So how doctors are trained to present themselves to people in a way that people make inferences about them may not be true. And so I really looked at the crisis that they're in, and I'm really pleased with the way the piece came out.
That's beautiful. That's really, really nice.
Yeah, but cutting it, I mean, sometimes I try to be ruthless. My favorite way of doing it is having the piece laid out already, and when the art director sends me galleys of how much has to be cut, and then you're faced with a finite space, and I'd rather cut my own throat than have someone cut it for me. So I just, that really forced.
That's such a dramatic way of putting it. It's really...
I mean, each word is my baby, and sometimes I don't care. Sometimes there are articles that they don't really stick to me quite the same way. That was one that did, but fortunately, I didn't have much cutting to do on it to get it to fit the space allotted, which is the way. Journals are not done the same way because the articles just run.
Right.
But magazines and other publications decide how much space they have, allocate it, and you damn well have to fit that space.
It's really interesting. I'm gonna have to go back and take a look at the article. Dwayne just nicely sent the link to it in the chat. Because that is a great example, an illustration of sort of the model that I have for the book, because you really were describing this compassion part. So that if somebody were negotiating with a doctor, the reason why one would want to have compassion is that you try to understand why they're doing what they're doing, why it's hard for them to do certain things for you. And even as you're listing the things that are invisible to you, one of the big ones is the amount of time that doctors now feel they have to spend on email and on these electronic medical records.
Well, the EMR, the electronic medical record, is the crux of the article, because within that, what it does, so the EMR has a format now, and the EMR, what it does is, number one, physically, it turns the doctor away from the patient, okay, so that there's no eye contact. But number two, what the EMR, what has happened to the electronic medical record is that it is a medical record, but the format of it is it's become a billing document.
Right.
And it's heinous for a lot of reasons, and how it breaks down every element of interaction when doctors are proceeding globally and using every bit of knowledge that they have to understand things, because not everything in medicine, is exceedingly clear cut. As an infection, where, you test for a bacterium and that's what you have. Most of medicine isn't quite that clear cut, especially these days with people with multiple diseases, chronic diseases. So it's so antithetical. The environment they work in has become so alien to them. And once you get that, it's like there's no turning back in your understanding of them. So
I don't know if you've ever seen a doctor like this. I have two doctors at Stanford, and what they do is they're both like super high prestige doctors. Like one of them is tenured in both engineering and cardiology and has 1 million patents in cardiovascular things. So and they both, as it turns out, I didn't know this originally, somebody told me, they have people who take notes for them. So they're looking at me the whole time. They don't write down anything. They have a transcriber.
Some places use that model.
But it turns out they pay for it.
Oh,
they
wow.
Pay for it out of their
personal expenses.
Yes, right, exactly. They pay for it out of their own expenses.
It turns out to be one of the models that places are contemplating. Do they have a scribe with each physician? We get into confidentiality problems, things like that. But it's interesting. I want to turn the conversation back to writing and editing. And so there are a couple of other people here. And I want to know, well, we could start with you, but I'd like to hit everybody else who's here. Like, what do you want to get out of writing? Why are you writing? Where do you see the role of editing and writing, and what do you want to get out of writing? So why don't you start since you're up?
Well, I think there are two sets of answers to that. So there's the sort of very specific, like how it fits into the financial aspect of my life. So I would like the book to, in one way or another, to support what I could call consulting, but it's really basically people pay me to either speak or to like things that I've recorded and they use that, or it could be software that I develop. I'm working with people on bias reduction stuff, or consulting about some project, though I don't really like that much. So the book from the financial perspective is not that the book itself would make money. It would be fine if the book lost money, but that it leads to some things that are financial. Then the second thing is,
because the book represents a package of expertise and that marks you as an expert in some way.
So marks me as an expert in some way. I get some of that just from being like a law school professor, but I think with it gets me a certain amount of publicity, and it seems like, oh, he wrote a book. I imagine that it would lead to my having more interviews and more, both about the book and about people asking me things about that, about the expertise that's in the book. So I think there'd be the publicity aspect to it. It would be the people would see the book somewhere and then they think, oh, wow, we should have him come and talk, or we should do this other thing with him. So there's that aspect to it. So there's that set of instrumental goals that way. And then I really enjoy certain aspects of the writing. So I enjoy the editing of it. So after I know that it's almost like the airport. So when I'm going on a flight, every stage until I am seated on the plane is, depending on how you look at it, a source of anxiety or a source of relief. So am I going to make it into the car on time? Will the car make it to the airport on time? Will I clear security on time? Will I get on the plane with enough room for my carry-on? Right? All of those crises, right? So once I get to the stage that, and they're pretty unpleasant, I would say. They're all pretty unpleasant. They're not equally unpleasant.
Yeah.
Once I'm on the plane, it's actually one of the most relaxing things that I do.
You can't do anything. You know?
Can't do anything, and it's pretty comfortable. It's like it's defined the range of things I can do. It's familiar. I know when it's going to end. I've planned for it. It's great. Yeah. So in a similar way, once I'm editing, like when I was looking at this project that's just going off to the publisher and I'm editing and just tweaking little things, that's actually a pretty impressive flow state right there. When I'm just writing in a very rough draft kind of way, like not necessarily even, so I'll sometimes think to myself, like I saw this morning, this cartoon, and I thought, oh, this is really funny. I should write a little piece on this cartoon. Jason, would you mind setting the table for it? Anyway, it goes on, and I thought, oh, I'll just write something about that. So I like doing that at the very early stage, the end stage. So some of it I like that way. I like the idea of interacting with people about my ideas, so talking about it. So when I've written a paper or when I give a lecture somewhere, I really like that aspect of it. And so the book, something longer, would give people a way of engaging with that. I also think the book fits my values in helping people that I couldn't help. I couldn't help as many people one-on-one. So a big part of it, which I didn't discuss, is about bias reduction, why it is that certain people, such as women and people perceived as minorities and when you're in a different environment, do less well. So I think that the book will scale not in a businessy sense, but the book will scale that people who I will never meet will read it and will benefit from it. And then there's like another ripple effect that then people in their lives will benefit from it. So if I write examples about how to negotiate about working from home, people will benefit, but then the people in their lives, and like with my dog who just went out, their dogs will benefit. Yeah, so those are the motivations. I think the unconscious motivation, which, I try to just acknowledge it, is the sense, there are two unconscious motivations. One is sense of like, oh, I have to do it. Like somebody in my position should do it. And if I don't finish a book, there's something wrong. And then the second one
Is this your first book?
yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. The second unwholesome motivation, I think, is a vague sense that it's
I'm
cool.
not sure that there are unwholesome motivations, but yeah.
Really?
I'm not sure being in the world that you're in, the academic world, that having a benchmark professionally is a bad motivation. You're interpreting it bad, but I mean, no. I mean,
That's good. That's good. You're right. You're right. And I should say, with my academic world, one of the reasons I set aside work on it about 4 years ago was the new dean, who's a friend of mine, had just gotten elected, and I asked for a sabbatical to work on the book. And he said, well, I'm not going to give you a sabbatical to work on this. This reads like a trade book. And I've written trade books. He's written bad trade books. I think one bad trade book. I'd rather you do more academic writing for journals. So I think, and my fantasy was at a time that if I published it in a business school press or with Oxford or with Yale or Cambridge, that it would be, I could bridge the gap.
Yeah, crossover. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that's possible. And I've stacked all these books in the other room that are examples of books that I thought were good on similar topics.
Right.
And when I look at them, really none of them are. The closest to crossover books are business school presses, which might or might not seem legitimate enough for what I'm doing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that's a long way of saying it might not impress my colleagues. It might be the opposite. There's another book that I was working on the Leo Frank case, which would impress them, because that's like a historical book and about my role in negotiating the pardon. But this particular one, I think, might not help my academic standing.
But yet you feel it's important, and important to you for a whole bunch of reasons you just articulated.
Yeah. No, you're such
do you expect it to take?
Oh, that's a good question. So Deborah knows that one thing I'd thought about, so I've considered different models for doing it. The model that I've used so far is I basically work on it on my own, talk to people about it periodically. Then there's the model of having a co-author. Then there's a model of having a developmental editor or writing coach, which overlaps a little bit. So I've thought about different models, and Debbie just put me in touch with somebody who is from Renaissance, who wrote the book about how the Renaissance changed our sense of taste and smell.
Oh yeah, right, Carolyn Purnell.
Yeah.
Enlightenment, yeah.
Yeah, and she's, right, I said Renaissance, right, how the Enlightenment. So I corresponded with her a little bit. I don't know. I mean, do you have any advice on that perspective of whether to work with somebody like that or to do it?
That's a whole separate conversation. No, I mean,
another time.
It depends on many factors, and it sounds like you're awfully far along for that in terms of.
Far along only since there's an outline, there's a prologue that's written, there are detailed outlines for some of the chapters. But I will say what I'm leaning towards, what I wrote to Caroline about, was I thought, when I'm looking at this and I've looked into research on what ghostwriters do, I don't need somebody to interview me. I could talk until the end of time. So I don't need that. But maybe what would benefit is if I just sat down for a week or 2 or 3 and just wrote out, as if I were just interviewing myself, what do I think about these various topics? And that would be one model. And then I send it to someone else to try to think about, well, okay, how would we structure this there?
Yeah, that's a good way of doing it. I mean, there are various ways that I write articles. And one of the ways I will do it, or I might ask someone some academic to write an article, and who might come back to me and say, or I've seen something in a journal, or I've heard them give a talk somewhere, and I know there's an article in there. And they might come back to me and say, I'd love to do this, but I'm finishing the world's largest grant proposal right now. I can't do it. Or, I'm got this other big project I'm working on. And then I will come back to them and say, often I'll counter propose, say, well, how about if I do a lot of background reading and then I interview you for an hour or two, record it, construct an article from that, and you go over it and edit it. And so it's through pointed interview questions that I get someone to target their thinking and can construct an article out of that. So it's really very useful if you have a really good questioner, someone who knows how each question, the importance of each question and how it relates to the whole and how it moves your argument or your goal forward. So, I mean, those are things to think about.
Oh, that is great. Oh, you're so generous with your time. Thank you very much. This is great. This
Good.
is
so I
just
want
perfect.
to ask, let's see, Dwayne, your name comes up next on my screen. Are you there? Hi.
I am. I'm doing a little bit of light construction, so I had my screen off.
Oh, okay. So the question I had was, what do you want to get out of writing? What do you want from writing? How do you see writing and editing, doing what you do? How do you see the relationship of editing to writing? And what do you want to get out of writing?
That answer has changed multiple times. I'm not 100% sure. So I don't think we ever talked about this, but where I'm at now started with me writing for my law school newspaper. And so the first time I wrote something, I just wrote something just to be writing it. And then they asked me, hey, why don't you write some more? And I said, nah. And then I said, well, maybe I could be the voice of the Black students. And so I did that. And then the next year, they tricked me into becoming the editor of the paper, despite the fact that they had actual journalists on staff. So, when they asked me to be the editor, I said, no, you have journalists. What are you talking about? And so they're like, no, trust me, you're the right person for the job. So I say, okay, maybe I could be the voice of the students. And so that way I became the editor and then learned about editing where I wasn't doing that before. So I had two, any article that came to me, I had two people look at it before I looked at it and learned about it basically from people who had already been in the business for that year. And so when it came to what I'm doing now, it started with me trying to do public speaking and finding out that, I'd have to either write a book or be famous or something like that in order to become somebody that could earn a living doing public speaking. And so now, somewhere along the line, it mutated into, well, I'm actually interested in what I'm doing and trying to turn something into something that people actually want to read. And so instead of pursuing public speaking right away, I've really just worked on my writing for the last couple of years. And so for me, it's more a case of, well, how do I put this thing, well, what am I interested in, which is always the question that you get. And then how do I put this together so that someone would actually be interested in reading it all the way through? So that's usually that's been my motivation for the last 4 or 5 things that I've written, has been just how do I put this together, and what's the structure of it, and what words do I use to express myself. And so I edit, I usually self-edit, so I edit with that in mind.
If a writer doesn't self-edit, they're not writing.
Okay. Well, yeah, so that's more, I'm sorry, I have an egg boiling too. I'll be right back.
Okay. Who's next up? Hirschberger, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay.
Hirschberg. Oh my God, I just saw Hershey. I feel like I won the lottery. This is great.
Yeah, I've been. It's less characters on the screen, takes up less room.
Well, you're on the spot. Okay, wait. You're going to be after Dwayne. So, Dwayne, I wanted to ask you something. Do you enjoy the process of writing? No, wait. I know all the challenges of getting into writing. And I know it's not always fun to get into it. But once you're into the process of writing, do you enjoy the process of writing, or is it just a struggle the whole way? Is there never flow? Do you like the feeling of writing?
It's changed over, like, especially the last 2 years. So before, if you looked at like what I would write, every other line would be a joke. And so I was writing for even if I was writing something on like finance and I'm trying to give you some information, I'm really writing for the next joke. And I don't do that as much anymore. I'll slip in a joke here or there. I usually include Avengers references in something that I write. But a lot of times the jokes are more for me than they are for the audience. And so I enjoy actually, ironically, enjoy the process of putting things in and seeing how much I can get into whatever it is I'm writing. And so the last thing that I wrote that was just published on Psychology Today, there's a Spaceballs reference, and the next sentence is a reference from Young Justice, a cartoon. And there's something else in there that I can't remember. What we have here is a failure to communicate. So,
right.
So that sort of thing, and then the trying to find a way, make sure that the end relates to the beginning and that different parts of it. So I enjoy like putting all of that together, like a musical composition.
Right. I mean, yes, a lot of metaphors, musical composition, or yes, in some way relating the parts to the whole. And it's interesting that everybody has a different metaphor for it. I like that. So something that you started doing in order to get credibility has now become, oh, I like the process.
Right.
And increasingly like the process, the playfulness of putting references in. I mean, those are all ways of enjoying the process.
Yeah, and I mean, I think, like if I really think back, when I was a teenager, I used to rap. And in addition to that, I wrote a couple of stories. They were like one page. So there was always a twist in the whatever story I wrote. Uh-huh. And then the entire goal of hip hop is to try to like write something clever every couple of lines. And so like that actually influences whatever I'm writing.
So, for most of us writers, the goal too is to write something clever every couple of lines, like why else do it?
Right.
If you can't say something that someone hasn't said before, or you can't say it in a really interesting or insightful way, I mean, hang it up, right. What's the point, right? So Mark, tell me about you and writing.
Well, I chose to write for the standard reasons of money, drugs, and sex.
Of course.
For me, it's just, I just, like Clark, just wanted to get the information out. I've been teaching students for 20 years, and I know there's many more people can benefit than I.
Uh-huh.
So I just said, time to put it down. Clark, hearing you talk about your writing process. Oh, he stepped away. Oh no, he's back. All I did to write, I didn't have an outline. I didn't have a plan. In fact, I thought I was writing a 30-page pamphlet instead of a 300-page book. But all I did was just imagine myself standing in front of my students, giving the talks that I've given for years. And some of them are formal talks. Some are, here are the questions I know I get asked often. I just sat there and I dumped it out on paper. I actually debated getting a speech-to-text translator, but I preferred the process of physically typing on the keyboard. And I just dumped it all out and then figured out a structure to kind of put it all into afterwards. So I had the opposite of an outline.
So, but you had the experience
Yes.
teaching people.
Yeah,
which,
that's what let me do it without a plan.
yeah. So you had all the information out there. You just had to find a way to organize it and give it a structure. So many of us, I won't say all of us, some of us, I mean, when I write articles, I do it the opposite way. I start without knowing a whole lot. If I knew a whole lot more, in fact, not knowing is what motivates me. Wanting to know kind of motivates me. But I mean, there's no one right way or one wrong way. I mean, it's just interesting to know why you do it and what you want to get out of doing it. And so the question I have for you is, in doing it, so can I assume that it was less a process of writing and more a process of assembling and organizing? Or is that a faulty assumption?
Yeah, I think the actual writing was pretty easy, dumping it all out. It was then trying to figure out a coherent narrative for it. And I've probably cut out of the 80-some thousand words of the book, I've cut probably a solid 30,000. And I don't just mean like cleaned up this section. I mean like throughout whole sections or half chapters. And then there's probably another 20, 30,000 words of sections I didn't actually write that were planned, where I just said doesn't make sense and threw it out.
Right. Uh-huh. And the stuff you threw out because?
It didn't fit into the narrative of the book.
Right.
I think it's still, there are worthwhile lessons there.
Sure. They're just not pertaining to the central one of what this book is about.
Right. And I'll figure out a way to work them into book 2.
Right. I was just going to say, so there's your other book kind of taking shape over there. I mean, that's really typical of writers all the time. There's lots of stuff or you want to know about for your book that really is tangential. And, some books just sprawl and at the risk of losing readers along the way. Some books sprawl but are so compellingly written that they don't lose too many readers along the way. But most books have kind of a goal, and most readers get kind of frustrated when a book starts sprawling, and most writers will take that material and, I have files of information, of stuff that'll go somewhere sometime, maybe. I don't know. Hopefully. So it will not have been in vain. But in writing my last book, I'll never forget, in writing my last book, I wrote a chapter, and maybe, let's say it was chapter 4. And I finished the book. And then, believe it or not, I sat down in a day and read through the entire book. And I needed to do that. I knew from my outline how everything related. I knew that it moved forward. And then, so I started from the beginning, and I get to chapter 4, and I wrote it. And I literally just couldn't figure out what the hell I was doing in that chapter. It was like, what is this? And I just sat down and rewrote the whole chapter. But, that's kind of self-editing. Everybody has to do it. And somehow there was this gap between chapter 3 and chapter 5, and chapter 4 didn't cut it. I don't think I could wasn't even intelligible to me, as I recall. I have to go back and look at all my two versions and see what went off track there. But it's really funny when you edit yourself, how you can just go, oh, wait, this isn't doing the trick at all. Either in carving out the space that the chapter should be, or in the way it's written and the information brought to bear on it. So it was just a very funny experience for me. It was like, ooh, I wrote that. Yeah, got to throw that one out. So, and managed to pull it all together. Debbie, is Deborah there?
I sure am.
So tell me about writing for you.
Well,
And if you could do it relatively briefly, because I want to get out into the sun, I think it'll help my shingles. So.
oh yeah. Well, writing for me is a love-hate relationship with hate dominating.
Oh no, we have to clear that.
And that's because if I don't feel like I have time to devote to it,
Hang with me. Oh, you won't hate it. Yeah.
Yeah, I have to make it a part of every day, or it's like starting a new exercise routine for me. It's just the getting to it.
Getting to it, or getting into it once you get to it.
Both.
Uh-huh.
I want, it's like exercise. I'll want to do it, and then when I'm doing it, it's such a part of my routine that it's great. But if I take a week off, that's like doom for me. And the same for writing. So it probably tells you a little bit more about my personality than anything else. But I am now with it. So if I get really busy and take off, it's very hard to get motivated to get back to it. And I'm not back to it yet. So
you have to figure out those things that get you to it. If you enjoy it when you do it, I mean, move things around. I mean, it's not as if you're not doing things and your life isn't busy. I mean,
right.
You're doing a lot of things.
Yes.
So, and consider the possibility that there are different seasons for doing different things. And this just may not be the season for writing, because writing takes a fair amount of headspace to do and to get into it. I remember when I was starting out, and I used to leave my deadlines for my writing for the last minute, right up against the deadline, thinking that creativity comes, when you're really under pressure. It's such a fallacy. And I do that, and it became so painful, in the sense that I loved the writing when I got into it. I loved doing it. I would hate to bring it to a close, but I'd have to bring it to a close because, like, we were going into print the next day. And so what that did was it forced me to keep moving back my approach, so that eventually, for decades, I haven't had a problem, in procrastinating or moving toward a deadline. But it's that sort of thing. You kind of have to, keep setting things up to get to have that pleasure and that reward that you get from doing it, if indeed you get a reward from it.
Yeah, interesting that you said seasons for it. Really, it's quite literal for me. The summer is my season for wanting to write. I don't have as many obligations, or I feel like I have a longer day. I feel like I have more hours to put in to be able to do it. And I feel like the less structure in the day helps me to write better. So, but it's interesting that you say that, because getting the guilt out of not doing it during winter months is something that, I have to probably just say, hey, I'm going to write in chunks of the year, not throughout the year.
I don't know. You have to do whatever works for, for your life. I mean, it's not as if you're sitting around popping bonbons all day, And, so,
That sounds great.
yeah, I know.
Sitting around popping bonbons all day. Wow, that's towards the end of my father's life. They called me. He was staying at the house, staying at his home, and the staff called me. They were taking care of him and said, like, "Oh, you have to come. He's just sitting in front of the refrigerator eating." And my father had been like, he had an 8-pack when he was 75, super fit his whole life, career military. So I go to the house. It's past midnight, and I said, "Dad, are you okay?" And he said, "I'm fine." And I said, "Why are you sitting in front of the refrigerator eating?" And he said, "Well, I was laying in bed and I realized, do you know this? I'm dying. I'm not going to live another year," which was true. He was dying for a variety of reasons. And I said, "I guess that's right." And he said, "So can you think of a reason I shouldn't eat until I fall asleep?" And I said, "No, not really."
It makes good logic to me.
But bonbons, I hadn't thought of that one.
Yeah, I know. Maybe we should all think of bonbons more. I mean,
None of us are going to get back to writing. So we're just
yeah, right.
So I want to thank you all for coming on today and for
I want to thank everybody.
letting us stump her or try to stump her.
Yeah, and if anyone has thoughts about topics that they'd love to discuss next Sunday, I'm happy to entertain ideas.